Welcome to Silicon Valley Buzz, a TV show where we discuss happenings in this, the most fertile spot on the planet for new ideas. And I'm your host, Seth Shostak. I was something else there for a moment. Tonight, affordable housing. Our high-tech, high-energy industry is driving up the cost of housing here in the Bay Area. And that's a problem if your income isn't rising as well. Now, is this just the inevitable workings of the market? Or should we do something to make some housing more affordable? We'll be talking about the pros and cons of affirmative action for affordable housing with my guests. Let me introduce them to you. To my left, John Inks, City Council member for the City of Mountain View. John, welcome to the show.
Glad to be on the Buzz.
Okay. Liz Kniss, Vice Mayor, the City of Palo Alto, our neighbor to the north. Liz, thanks for being with us.
And thanks for inviting me.
And Kevin Zwick. Kevin is the CEO of the Housing Trust here in the Silicon Valley. Kevin?
Thank you for having me.
Great. All right. So why are we talking about this? I mean, affordable housing, especially here, and perhaps the most dynamic economy in the state, maybe in the world. Why is this a problem here?
So I would start out by saying I think affordable is, in this valley, about when you bought your house. If hopefully you bought your house, you bought a condo, whatever you happen to buy. But affordable housing is absolutely, I think, what you can afford to buy. And yes, in Palo Alto, we've subsidized about 2,000 units. We have about almost 30,000 dwelling units. So I think if you come to Palo Alto, you're not going to think it's an affordable city. And I think it's getting harder, not easier. So I'll see what my colleagues to the right and the left have to say.
Well,
but affordable is tough.
Well, and are you distinguishing affordable housing, which is relative, as someone that wants to buy a house in Mountain View, they're buying them for $1 million, versus subsidized?
Way too much, right?
No, I mean, I don't think that that's necessarily too much. That's the opinion and the capability of individual home buyers. Okay, is what's affordable. It's very, very subjective. I think the heart of this discussion that I came to was more specifically the subsidized housing. And do the subsidized housing programs, are they really that effective?
I think we have to be careful here because we want to make sure that we're creating a place where all workers and all people have a home, have an ability to stay here. There's plenty of families and people who have lived in Silicon Valley for a long time that have seen their kids go to school, graduate, and then can't find housing, can't find either a home to purchase or even an apartment to rent, and people are going to have to move out. And it's not just one small group of people. I think unless you're incredibly well compensated or you were lucky enough to have purchased your home 20 plus years ago, then housing is incredibly tough, and you can't just wash your hands of 95% of the workforce and say, too bad, you can't afford to be here.
Let's back up just for a moment, because I want to establish why the problem is now. If we were having this discussion 20 years ago, would we be even having this discussion?
It would be the same problem.
Has it just been endemic? Just the fact that we're on a peninsula, there's limited land, and there's never going to be enough housing for all the jobs we can create here? Is just part of being part of this, this
many
economy,
people want to live
close. Is there something new? Because housing is much more expensive now than it was 20, 30 years ago.
Well, I think it's relative, of course.
Very relative.
Beyond that, I think what also happens is we want to live close to where we work. That's one of the biggest goals. And on the peninsula, we have usually 2 to 3 times as many jobs as we actually have housing. We think subsidized housing, to some point, is a good idea in Palo Alto. So there's some, but it's getting harder and harder to even think of subsidizing because it's getting harder and harder to be more dense. And what we've discovered is our population in Palo Alto is really resisting becoming more dense, and density is what allows more affordable housing.
Is it harder to become more dense because there just isn't the space, or is it because people don't want a 4-story building next to them?
There isn't the will. So
exactly.
We'll get into it if you want to later, but Palo Alto had a really devastating vote regarding affordable housing last fall.
Okay. Now, Kevin, you mentioned the fact that this has societal consequences. Maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit, because you're saying, look, I go down to El Camino to have lunch, and the people that are serving me lunch, they're low income, most of them. Okay?
Correct.
Do you want them to live, 50, 100 miles away, or do you not?
Well, I mean, that's it exactly. For every one job that we create in the high-tech sector, we create 4 jobs that in the service sector to help with the overall economy. And we have to find housing and make sure housing exists for everyone in the economy. Because the alternative is either one, people live further and further away and clog up our roads and make transportation a mess for everyone, or say, well, you're sort of on your own, and if it means with incredible housing prices, 3 families, teaming up in one apartment, then so be it. But that doesn't reflect our values. It doesn't reflect our values in Silicon Valley, and I think that's sort of where we're going as in local economy, as housing, and our employers will tell us. People who have cited their companies here and have decided to grow their companies here, they say affordable housing is the #1 issue that keeps this from being a competitive region compared to other places around the country.
But isn't the big question, though, how do you get money into that segment? Because if it's going to create 4 or 5 jobs for every tech job, that would mean that as a city, we would be subsidizing very substantially. And the question is, who's putting the money into that? And I know how the Housing Trust works from being at the county for so long, and it's a commendable group. But overall, our opportunity in this valley to really combat the housing jobs imbalance, Palo Alto are about 3 to 1, is almost impossible at this point. And as hard as the Housing Trust can work at it, I don't know how we as a city in particular catch up.
Well, I would say, Seth, to be able to catch up is to first not implement flawed housing policies, because the supply of housing that you're looking for the low-income people is actually taken out of market rate construction. So you're actually driving the cost of market rate housing by having housing impact fees that actually, in the case of Mountain View, that just opened up a lovely, wonderful, architecturally styled family housing unit downtown on Franklin Street for 50 families. It was $23.8 million. It was $475,000 a unit, which is actually higher than the hard cost for market rate housing. So these are very, very expensive housing programs, the subsidized housing programs that support a tiny, tiny fraction of the low-income population. And I would have to say, Seth, that actually I challenge the affirmative action part of your statement there, because I, as a policymaker, want to lower the cost, do what I can, despite the market conditions, to lower the cost of all housing, including the market rate housing, and to find out the most effective way to support lower income housing.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with you to say that that we need a lot more housing at all different income levels, and we need policies that are pro-housing growth for all different incomes. Last year, Silicon Valley created about 42,000 new jobs, but we only permitted 7,500 new housing units affordable to any income levels. And that's been going on for 20, 30 years, and that's what's creating the unaffordability. So I would agree that we need policies that encourage housing at all different levels, but we have to address the fact that the only way that you make housing affordable to people earning, under $50,000 a year, which is a big part of the economy, is by subsidizing it. And it's been a part of federal, state, and local housing policy for generations that this is a shared responsibility between local government, the state government, and the private sector. And I think there's 2 ways to do it. It's either through directly funding it, or by letting the power of the market develop as much housing as possible and say to the developers, as you're building all of the housing, set aside 10%, 15% for different goals, because we as a city are required to come up with housing opportunities for people at all income levels.
We could talk about density bonuses, because density bonuses do exist. There's a state law that requires that you give more to the developer if there is a density bonus involved. And we've recently passed an ordinance in Palo Alto.
When you say density bonus, they get more if it's higher density?
They get more if it's higher density.
Okay, or
exactly.
if it's located close to a transit hub or something like
exactly.
that.
Exactly, and any number of criteria that go into that. And we just did a 90-unit building that is right on Alma, as close to transit as you could possibly get. Again, though, the credits come from all over the country. They don't simply come from us here in the Bay Area. Credits can come from DC, they could come from Sacramento. So you put a group of credits together, and yes, you end up with, John, I don't know exactly what ours were in Palo Alto, but I think it's worth it. It was worth it to me to watch the people who went into this, and almost all who live in Palo Alto before, but many of whom were homeless, or many who lived in very substandard, but now are in a good house, kids are going to a good school, and I think it makes a difference in how your population serves you as a community and what happens with the kids who are in your community at the same time.
But Liz, you said earlier, you said, look, there's just no way we can do it in Palo Alto. There's no way we can accommodate the growth in jobs, which
we can't do it all. We can do some of it, but not all of it.
He's saying that 80% of all the new jobs are, in fact, lower paid jobs. In fact, they're not the people that can buy the $1 million house. Okay, so what are you going to do? You're going to say, you people live, somewhere else, not Palo Alto, or maybe not Mountain View.
No.
How do we approach this?
I'll tell you how we approached it was through a lottery system, which may not be the best way to do it, but it seemed to us to be the fairest way to do it. And we know how many people would like to live in Palo Alto or Mountain View or wherever you happen to want to live in this area. You cannot support all of it, so you do what you can. And I think we made a tiny dent, but we'll never absorb all the people who would like to live there.
John?
Well, I would say that's a very expensive, tiny dent. I mean, what you're talking about is a situation where policymakers, some people on my panel here, you don't think about housing type, product type. And for instance, in my...
What's product type?
Product type, I'm talking about the type of unit. Whether it's a single resident occupancy house like we have right over here in Mountain View, whether it is perhaps maybe instead of incorporating housing into new market rate property, that you actually consider actually having more tenants located in existing property, things like that. We need to challenge the inclusionary aspect of inclusionary zoning, because on the Madeira apartment complex in Mountain View, we had the opportunity to provide 20 units. Council majority said no, they wanted 7 in that project. We could have, supported more than double the number of people that actually got low-income housing.
Did they say they wanted less than half?
Because I think they're attached to the idea of inclusionary zoning. None of this housing that we do in Mountain View, in fact throughout this county, is actually cheap housing at all. It's all actually very, very higher end, not much different from what's built in the market rate housing.
Wouldn't you agree it's high end because of the land? I mean, it's the land costs that we're...
If you go down to the...
Well, I would disagree with that, John, because I'm telling you, what our land is running right now is extraordinarily expensive. Extraordinarily expensive.
But when you look at all the hard costs for market rate housing versus subsidized housing, the subsidized housing is actually more expensive.
Well, I really have to challenge you on that.
Yeah.
I think the reason why it gets to the land costs, it gets to all of the costs that you have to spread over the most number of units that you can in a housing development. And what happens when you're an affordable housing developer is because there's not the community will, as much community will for affordable housing, you take a development that's feasible at 80 units or 80 homes, and then you have to make it 40 homes or something smaller. You have to make it, a very different look of the building in order to get enough political will to support your development. And what you're doing is driving up the cost of it. So it's not necessarily because it's affordable that makes it expensive. It's because in order to get the community support, a development that's very efficient at 80 homes gets chopped down to 40 units because people are talking about density, but what they're usually talking about is fear of people coming in that are different than are there right now.
I do want to get into the social aspects of this, because this is sort of an elephant in the room here, and there is room in this in the studio for an elephant, and that is that people often do not like affordable housing. It doesn't have good karma for a lot of people. They think, okay, it's going to be trash, or it's going to lower property values. My house, which is a block away, will be worth less, and these people will cause problems, whatever. To what extent is that playing a role here? Because I'm hearing from everybody that, well, we can nibble at this problem around the edges, but we couldn't get the buy-in of the voters to attack it at a...
Well, we know we can't in Palo Alto because we did it last fall and put out a 60 a 60-room unit that would have held very low-income seniors. And that's a neighborhood that rose up and essentially said, no, we don't want that kind of density in our particular neighborhood.
Right, there's a NIMBY factor. So how do you get around
it went down.
I want to ask Kevin that, because he thinks about this a little bit.
Well, part of it is getting people to understand that people who live in affordable housing are already living in your city. They're already living in your family, and they're just barely struggling to get by with our incredibly high cost of housing. So the more that we can get people, number one, to understand who it is that's living in affordable housing, that in addition to the teachers and the firefighters and the police, it's your kids who are starting out their careers, or the young people who might have been serving you coffee at your favorite coffee house. That's an important part too, is getting people to understand that it's helping people who are already living here but who are struggling to stay here.
I mean, can people see the long-term consequences of a stratified society? Because that might not improve your standard.
Well, we do have a stratified society at 135 Franklin Street right now, because the adjacent condo complex that initially strongly objected to this housing being built there. You drive around and look at those products right now. The people in the market rate housing are saying, you know, that's an improvement over the neighborhood. You know, we need to dress up our properties. And so once they saw, and it was Rome was a developer, they went to San Jose and they saw what they had done in San Jose. They were sold. Yeah. They were immediately project supporters. So I think that factor can be overcome. I recognize that's not really the discriminating factor at community buy-in on affordable housing, at least not in Mountain View. Some of us are trying to find the best way to do it under the circumstances with not exacerbating the cost of market rate housing at the same time, which is actually based on a flawed principle. We go on a Nexus study that is based on saying that, well, if you build housing, that creates the need for more housing. You know, it contradicts fundamental macroeconomic theory. And so...
That's not a theory I've ever heard, by the way, that if you build housing, you need more housing?
Exactly. That's the basis.
No, it's what type of housing. It's if you're building luxury housing and you're bringing in households that spend a lot more in the local economy, creating more jobs at the local level that pay minimum wage or just above it, you have to figure out a place to house those workers. So it is actually pretty, I mean, it's established. Many cities have done these Nexus studies. They've stood up to both the economics and the law. So I actually think it is very sound theory that when you bring in a lot of households who have a lot more disposable income to spend in your downtowns, which is what we want, we just have to realize that creates jobs, which you need to find places to house all of these people who make less than $100,000 a year.
And yet that's what every city is looking for. Every city is looking for that, you know, whatever wonderful thing it is that makes your city just flourish. But I think more than anything, if we know who the people are who may go into the affordable housing, we might be far more inclined to support it. But most of the time when we're talking about affordable housing, it's a mystery group out there. Who are these people?
How would you do that, Liz? How would you present the kind of people? I mean, Kevin's talked about it as well. The kind of people who are actually in this housing, the teachers, whatever, the firemen, the people you rely on for your gusto-grabbing lifestyle. These are essential to your lifestyle.
And I think what you really need to have that happen is to have that group really come to the fore. Many of them have supported the Housing Trust. That's how many of the teachers have gotten a start in the Valley. So if you know that your first grade teacher's child is one of those waiting for housing, you're much more likely to support it. If it's the cop that you've seen, you know, around town on a regular basis who says, you know, if you guys end up supporting that project there, I will actually be able to move here. That makes a big difference. You want to know who's coming in. Otherwise, it's a mystery face, and you described it and you said it's kind of like, who are those people? Yeah. Because it's scary.
Seth, we need to clear the air here about, you know, who goes into affordable housing. It's not public safety. Public safety employees make much more money than what is the base level for who actually qualifies for affordable housing now. And so the idea that you're going to do teachers and nurses and public employees in affordable housing, they're not the ones that really need it.
Oh, well, no, absolutely. There are teachers who are in affordable rental housing, but to your point, many cities, including Mountain View, have programs to help first responders and fire and police purchase homes in your city, in different cities. So while it's true that maybe on the subsidized rental housing for people earning $50,000 and less, that's one class of worker, but absolutely cities have other types of affordable housing programs to try to get police, fire, first responders to be able to purchase homes within your cities. And now, sometimes that's not enough help to make it worthwhile for people earning, between $50,000 and $100,000. You still need extra assistance. The Housing Trust, we assist families earning up to $120,000 a year for a family of four, and it's not from a want of being able to use our programs and purchase a home. It's really the opportunities just aren't there. There's very few homes on the market.
I'm
and
told
really
you have to
high
earn
up.
at least $31 an hour these days to be able to live here in the South Bay.
I
be
think
able to
that would be
rent,
the
yes.
absolute minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure you could do it at that. Maybe buy the house, but if you believe that old adage that you should only spend 25 to 30% on housing, that is not the case in the Valley. And then on top of it, we have Prop 13, which says if you buy that $1 million house, you're going to be paying $10,000 a year in taxes. If you buy the $2 million house, it's $20,000 a year in taxes. That's a huge amount to add on to $31 an hour. So I would again disagree, John. The teachers, many of the teachers are not paid salaries that allow them to live in the communities in which they teach.
Yeah, well,
and our starting police force doesn't either. So maybe they're better paid in Mountain View.
No, we created a housing program strictly for employees to help them out, and no one took it. No public employee in Mountain View took that.
And why?
They got a better deal just going out on the market. They didn't want our help. And to your point about Proposition 13 was 34 years ago. And 34 years ago,
1978.
and that's when I bought my first condo. It was $78,000. I worked like a dog and saved up $20,000 to get it. Housing has always been expensive here in this valley. It is particularly expensive now because of the robust economy, the jobs, the demand to live in this area now. It's extraordinary. And so there's actually limited things that we can do in local government. But one thing that we can do is to not exacerbate the increased costs for market rate housing, and so that there is some chance that by building apartments like we are in Mountain View, that you're going to help out some people. The other thing is that you have this idea that someone that earns 30% of the AMI, that they're going to be actually able to live in Mountain View all the time, making that kind of income. We need to talk about the ability to pay as well, because they're in a market competing with people that can pay $2,000, $3,000 a month. Where are these people with respect to
Are you talking about rentals now, or are you talking about buying?
Both, either. Where are the low-income individuals with respect to education, job experience, language proficiency, getting a second job, which some people have to do to be able to afford housing here?
Well, I would put that question
Yeah.
back to you.
Yeah.
When you envision your city, do those people have a place? Or do you think, you belong in a different city, you belong in a different place? Because I'd have to say, I know plenty of people who grew up in Mountain View who don't agree with that, who say, we were those workers 30 years ago who might have been making $12,000 then, and we found places to live in Mountain View. It might have been a mobile home park, it might be an apartment, but even all of those are being lost. So I put that back on you and say, who's in your city? And then if those people do have a place, then what are your policies going to be that ensures that some of them are going to be able to afford it? And I would say it's not really all totally up to the cities. The cities used to have a lot of tools to promote affordable housing in your communities through funding provided through redevelopment agencies or inclusionary zoning. We've talked about inclusionary zoning a couple times here. This is this idea that when you build market rate housing, that you set aside some of the units to meet community needs at different income levels. But both of those tools have been taken away by Sacramento. So a big part of this is not just what's happening at the city level, but what has to happen in Sacramento to give cities tools again to create affordable housing.
We're running kind of short on time. This is this is a discussion that could take more time. I do want to look at the big picture here, to look down the road a little bit, because it seems to me that we're not solving this problem. We are addressing it. Solutions are difficult. If it wasn't difficult, we would have probably already come up with a solution. But it seems that there are only really two things you can do in the long run here. Either you say, look, there's going to be a limit on the growth of jobs here, or growth of population. And I've heard candidates for city council in Mountain View 10 years ago say, you know, the city of Mountain View ought to have 60,000 people and not more. Well, we do have more. Okay, so either you're going to enforce that, or you go to higher density and you allow, you know, apartment buildings, and it looks a little bit more urban. What do you, very quickly, what do you all see as the future?
Well, generally, what we put in the general plan, which I actually supported, which is how you densify a city that's already pretty much built out in Mountain View and still provide the environment. And what we decided to do as a community, not just me, but we picked certain areas of town: El Camino Real, San Antonio Shopping Center, North Bay Shore, East Wisman. That's where the growth would be. So one way of dealing with this fact is to recognize, how are you going to control the population? You know, I'm not going to deny the predictions that I'm getting from Sacramento, from ABAG, to actually say just put a limit on population is kind of unrealistic. You know, I mean, we're going to grow to about 90,000 or so people, one way or the other, between now and 18 years out, 18 years out. And so we should actually plan to be able to do that.
Liz?
But what we've discovered is that we just took up our comprehensive plan again. And I happened to have been there the last time they did the comp plan. And there was no question, they all agreed livable, walkable, dense enough, and close to transit. And you know what happens the minute you pick a site and you say this can be denser and can go higher, is the entire neighborhood will rise up and say, that's not where we want it. So I know all the areas you've described, and I'd be willing to bet if they actually build on those, a number of people will rise up, just as we had a group in Palo Alto last fall, and say, it's not going to work.
Sounds bad.
Well,
Kevin?
we need an all of the above housing policy, and we need to not say it's some cities only housing and some cities only jobs. We need all the jobs that are coming, and we need all the housing that's coming too. And it's people talk about density, but you know, we need 4-story, 5-story, 9-story, 10-story buildings.
I want to thank John Inks, Liz Kniss, Kevin Zwick for a very stimulating discussion on a very contentious issue. I'm Seth Shostak for Silicon Valley Buzz. I hope you'll join us next time.